ora whānau. So we're back for another video, and yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you all for supporting us this whole time and for joining us on this video. Really awesome to see the engagement and the feedback and the comments that we've been getting on the past videos. So it's just been really motivating and invigorating for us to keep sharing and finding new ways to deliver the information. So yeah, big mihi to all of you for showing us that support. This week, Sean and I have been working at the food forest at Ngararatunua in Kamo, Whangarei. So for those of you that may have not seen the past videos on this, we released one in, I believe, mid-November last year. So that's about 3 months ago. And we did a spring chop and drop at that time. So the last few days we've been working in the food forest for a summer chop and drop. And yeah, just want to share some observations on that. So it's a 200 square meter food forest that we installed just over a year ago in October 2019, with 750 different plants in there, all working together in the right strata, life cycle, succession. We can really fit in that density because of the diversity. So it started off from a sort of kaikuyu paddock, really overgrown, about waist high kaikuyu. So you can see here, this is what it looked like, and now if we scan over, we see what it now is. This lush, 1-year-old, abundant food forest grove, no kaikuyu in sight. We didn't use any plastics, any cardboard, any sprays. We just planted a very dense and diverse quantity of plants that allowed for that space to really transform and become the forest that it really wants to be. So a lot of New Zealand, especially North Island here, the climate's just ideal with the rainfall that we have, to the sunlight that we have, to the soils. It all really wants to be a forest. So whenever we're holding nature back to be a paddock, grassland, a monoculture of some sort, we're holding that back. So we're putting way more struggle than necessary to stagnate and hold nature back. It is so much easier when we go, okay, you want to be a forest? Well, let's orchestrate that. Let's guide that so that it's not just a forest, but a forest that we can be a part of as well. So we can work together in that ecosystem with nature. So that's ideally what we're trying to achieve here, and it's already happening. To walk through there in just 1 year and see the diversity of plants just loving that space, from natives to crop plants to mulching crops, to also the wildlife already coming in. So we see all these little bird nests that have little eggs inside of them. The insect life is rich in there, and also the soil life. It's just so lush, so lush. It's so rewarding. Last video on the spring chop and drop, we did a really heavy prune. We really set things back so that they can really bounce back before summer, allowing that spring sunlight to come in and help lift those understory plants with enough sun to really boost them forward. And that's what we call pulsing. So in nature's got its own timeline, right? There is no rush for nature to evolve into a big abundant food forest or forest. It can really take its time, but due to the stresses that we've put on the planet as humanity, we really need to find ways that we can engage with the environment to fast track that regenerative process of nature to heal and regenerate the land that we've so abused around the world. So this is why we come in quite intensively, and it can seem quite crude or quite brash or quite aggressive, but really we're doing it with the best possible intentions. We're doing it with utmost understanding and observation. So when we come in, we are being the wind, we are being a infestation of pests or fungal spread. We are being those natural forces that occur in nature to reset, create a certain level of chaos, to realign and invigorate an ecosystem. And we're doing it in a very specific and orchestrated way so that we can really enhance and help the momentum of nature's natural drive in succession to create this outcome of abundance. that we can be a part of. So we belong in our environment. So for those of you that have seen our videos and how harshly we cut things back, and especially the last video we did of the space, our spring chop and drop, we went right down to the floor with a lot of our plants, and that can seem drastic, but now look at it, you know, that was 3 months ago and now it's a massive big forest again. And it's just unbelievable the rate of growth that happens when we really take care of our plants this way, when we act in accordance to nature to really propel and increase the metabolism of the soil. It does wonders. So for our summer chop and drop, because of the increase in intensity of the sun, we want to be mindful that we don't over prune. So we don't chop back too much of that canopy, that emergent canopy especially, that then our delicate understory plants that actually prefer more of a forest ecosystem don't get burnt and sunburnt. So you'll find that if you're planting things like avocados or lucuma, or certain even citruses, sapotes, they actually are quite sensitive to that sun intensity. So any plant that naturally is more inclined to be in a forest environment, like cherimoyas per se as well, they will actually get sunburnt if they're exposed to too much sun. So we want to maintain that emergent layer in summer. So when we prune in this time of year, we do a really light prune where we mainly focus on clearing and opening up the low to high strata, and then we just crown lift our emergence to open up those stratas. But we don't pollard, we don't coppice any of our plants, we really just maintain a nice density in our emergent layer, and we open up the lower layers so we can create that ventilation coming through, and we can also let that sun trickle down and help pulse or encourage those other trees down below to jump up whilst there's still sun in summer, but not so much that they get blitzed by the sun and go brown and get sunburnt. We don't want that. So another reason why we account for density and diversity in our space is we see sun as a resource that we want to capture as much as possible through the solar panels of all of our leaves to transform that sunlight energy through photosynthesis into sugars, which then feed the soil microbes in exchange for nutrients and minerals, therefore creating a healthier and more resilient forest. So we want to maximize the amount of sun that we're capturing. So we want as little as possible of that sun to hit the floor. So we want a density of leaves, but we want a diversity of leaves, because if we had a monoculture of the same leaves, we would create competition. But by stacking and having a diversity of leaves, capturing the sun in all sorts of different ways and all the different layers, we're making the most of that sun all the way down to the ground floor. And when we do a chop and drop, we mulch all the things that we chop back in situ on the ground. So therefore we're creating a nice cycle of nutrients where the plants that have been placed in that food forest that all have different functions are able to draw and exchange with the different soil life, different minerals that then they bring up into their foliage, which then when we chop and drop, we're bringing that back down onto the ground. And a lot of the time, certain plants specify on different minerals or different nutrients that they draw from the ground, which for other plants are not bioavailable. So when they draw those minerals up, and then through the leaf litter or through pruning, we actually cycle that back into the ground, it is then bioavailable for the other plants around it to be able to access those nutrients. So that is why you'll see that we've got eucalypts, for example, in this food forest. It's way too fertile, way too good of an opportunity really for eucalyptuses. But because we're managing them so intensely, we're not letting them go into massive trees. We're pruning them every season, returning a lot of those nutrients back onto the ground. They're actually able to, with their strong root system, open up root channels in the soil, draw certain water and nutrients that other plants may not be as able to or accessible to, draw it right up into the foliage, which then we return back to the ground. So they become our water and nutrient pumps for the system. So this is how we can stack and integrate different plants into one space to benefit the overall haul, which may in 40 years be one beautiful oasis of native forest, or it might be still by then an integrated native forest with our food crops like our pecans and our figs and our macadamias and our avocados that are in there. In the meantime, we had an awesome harvest of vegetables in the first year. Now we're starting to get into our tamarilla fruit and soon our bananas. So you see, we're stacking the amount of density and diversity of trees to allow for food production and wildlife integration from day one all the way to 60 plus years. So with the density, we did come in mainly with a lot of already potted plants. Because it was a community project as well, it's always nice to see something already in the ground and have a certain level of reward of the day. And so yeah, it was a beautiful big whānau gathering, and we planted it all together, the whole 750 plants, and it was just really beautiful to step back and see all the plants in space. But ideally we would actually try and plant as much of that as possible by seed, because the root formation when you plant things by seed is just 100 times better. It's stronger, you're not having any disturbance when you transplant them, and the roots don't get bound up in the pots. So overall, the more you can plant by seed, the better. And we did do a few things by seeds. So we did a lot of chirimoya by seed, we did avocados by seed, and man, the avocados are already my waist high. It's amazing. And we also, when we do things by seed, we plant 5 or 6 in the same hole, because then we can select which ones do the best from then on. So yeah, way overplant with things that are free, that are easy to access. You can always chop them out. They can always be increasing the biodiversity and the density in the food forest. They'll be adding to the metabolism of the soil. So no loss there. So go hard on planting things by seed. So another thing I want to speak to today is our use of tools. So as you can see, we interchange between our different tools quite often. So I really recommend, as soon as you start putting in a food forest or you're managing one, to get yourself a nice, it's called like a harvester belt, I think. Nice little pouch, and include in that secateurs, a serrated toothed nawashi sickle, a small handsaw, and of course a machete. So that would be your sort of core little kit. Maybe you want to include like a little sharpener in there as well, machete sharpener, and also, sorry, don't forget, a nice Kevlar cut-proof glove as well. So yeah, so you can see we're just interchanging between the two. Having them on hand is just so helpful, because you're always swapping one tool for the other. So if you can have them on you, much easier. And yeah, and then it's just fun. You know, you go into the food forest and it's not even with a sense of as it was work or a chore or anything. It's like a martial art. You know, you get really fun with it, and you just feel so a part of the system, and it's so fun to do together as well. You know, we're constantly in that space, you know, being like, oh, dude, check this out, you know, look how much this has grown, or look at this beautiful bird's nest, or, you know, it's just, it brings so much joy to be in that environment. So really, the more people we can inspire to set up, whether it's small or large scale food forests, we really recommend just put a guild in, whether it's 10 square meters big. You'll get the bug in no time, and yeah, it'll be hard to get you out of there. So the main things we want to go into a food forest management session with is first and foremost observation. So by no means are any of the steps we break down in terms of what plants should prune how should be just copy and paste applied to any situation. First off, do have a good wander around your whole food forest block that you're wanting to intervene in. and really observe what strata dynamics are happening, what stratas are clashing, what trees might look like they're been quite dormant for a while, not getting enough sun, what trees look like they've had too much sun, what trees are looking like they're under attack of either mold or certain pests. What does the soil look like? Is it moist? Is it really dry? Is it bare? Has it got mulch on it? And once you've sort of got a good overview of what you've got to work with, then apply certain stages to the process in which you engage with the food forest, but again, maintaining that observation the whole time, observing if there's any bird's nests before you chop down that tree. Making sure you're aware of what season it is and the sun intensity it is, when you're going to get rain. You know, it isn't advisable to do a massive chop and drop just before you have a lot of rain, as we did, because a lot of those cuts are actually then exposed to a lot of fungal spores that could actually create rot and disease. So there is all those things to take into account, but nor do you want to do a chop and drop when you've got really harsh sun, because then you're going to open up all that sunlight, and then that sunlight's just going to come and blitz it. So, you know, just being aware of the weather that you're in. If you've got a few overcast days but it's not raining, that is the best ideal time to do an intervention. And then when you come into the food forest, work from the ground up. So first, before you lay and chop and drop big branches of mulch onto the ground, squashing any potential seedlings, really just first use your sickle, getting rid of any of those, cutting back any weeds or any grasses or any mulching crops that you've got in the lower layer, returning those onto the soil. So not uprooting anything if you can, try not to pull anything up unless there's little bits of kikuyu still in there or something. But for the most part, just try and chop and drop everything, because you want as little of that soil disturbance as possible. All those root systems breaking up the soil is welcome, even if it's a weed. You can always chop it back, mulch it, chop it back, mulch it, and then it'll phase out. So yeah, first start in that sort of ground layer, moving in with your sickle, being aware of any little seedlings that are coming up, and then so once you've got a sort of picture of the ground layer, you move upper strata. So in this case, we went into our Tittonia, and because we were doing a summer chop and drop, so a bit lighter, we're just wanting to cut them off at around a meter and a half high. Basically just left with a series of sticks, and the sun is able to filter down to the lower layer, but enough height so that as summer progresses, it can quickly bounce back and cover that and shade back that space so that the intensity of sun doesn't last too long. And then we move upper layer, and we're crown lifting then our emergent canopies. So that's when we're really observing, which branches are coming into the space of either the mid layers. You know, is our emergent and our mid and high layer sort of clashing? We want at least a good sort of 50 centimeters to a meter spacing between those two different layers, so that the sun can really optimally fill those strata layers and keep that growth up. So we want to crown lift any of our emergent trees so they're not interfering with those lower layers. And then in the emergent layer itself, we also want to make sure any conflicting branches of two different emergent trees aren't clashing as well. So for example, in this space we've got our eucalypts and our brush wattles, which are our two main pioneer emergents in the space for this year. They are quite often clashing because they're quite dense, and so we're just wanting to prune those branches that are touching, giving them some space. And the reason why we can get away with that density is because we can prune. If we were not engaging the way we were and we just planted it and walked away, it would be quite chaotic and it would be really stagnant. There are a lot of senescence going on. Trees would disproportionately dominate over others, and we wouldn't create that same thriving abundance that is an ecosystem that we can be a part of. It would end up being a lot of arborists coming in to help deal with that situation. So we want to stay on top of it, we want to manage it, and that way we can get away with the amount of density that we have, because we're managing and we have diversity. So in this situation where we have the euc and the brush wattle and they're colliding, we're pruning them back and giving them that space, And eventually, you know, it's a year on now, our brush bottles will only have a life cycle of about max 4 years in the system, and then they'll start phasing out, by which the ukes can then really start filling out that space, and we can keep them actually pollated. So the raisin trees that will then succeed our brush bottles will become our more primary emergent tree, which we can also prune back to allow for then our next climax emergent tree, which is our inga beans. And eventually we'll just have raisin trees and inga beans, and we can prune them as such so that they don't have that competition either. So I hope that gives you an idea of how, by understanding the life cycle of each of those plants, even just in our emergent layer, we can really stack that density because of the diversity of the different plants that we're using, understanding the different life cycles. So when they are competing, it is only for a brief moment in which they are sort of succeeding one another. And now walking through the food forest after a chop and drop, you can see it's much lighter, there's a lot more sun coming into the space, but we still have a nice emergent canopy that is filtering that light, so it's just a nice dappled light coming through to our lower layers, and not that strong complete sun as if we were to do a massive chop and drop. And also take into account that not every plant that you put in are going to thrive the same way. You know, for some seemingly random reason, we have some brush bottles in the system that are boasting it, they're massive trees already, and some that are still knee-high struggling away, whether or not it was because they didn't have enough light for some reason when they first started compared to the others, too much moisture, not enough moisture. There's so many factors that come into play, and some of those you can mitigate by really observing and understanding and taking account for those factors, and some just happen. And so planting a density of the same plants is really important for that reason. Plant the density and the diversity, and together with your eye, with your management, with your observation, you can really just help that momentum of that forest to just grow and grow and grow and really transform that space. So yeah, I hope this video was informative and for the most part inspiring. Yeah, I really encourage you guys to just go out there, start a guild, a food forest, however small, however big. Just make sure you've got that density, diversity, and that presence on the land to be a part of it, to observe and interact. Here's to enhancing life and creating beauty.